Hello, I'm Daniel Thompson. Welcome back inside my mind. Today, I want to talk to you about something that we're all aware of, but I don't think that many of us acknowledge outright. And it's this: you are always being manipulated, in one way or another. Full disclosure, right now I'm trying to kind of manipulate you. I and every other podcaster out there or somebody with a platform is speaking in a calm, pleasing voice, accompanied by soft, not very distracting music, to make what we're saying far more palatable for you, so that you might believe us. Isn't that fun, when you say it out loud? I know, it kind of shatters the illusion, but I'm always honest. I swear I'm not doing it for nefarious purposes. Scout's honor. Alright, I was never a Boy Scout. Anyway, when it comes to our society, think about it this way. For instance, how many of us grow up thinking that lemmings will just blindly follow each other off a cliff and commit suicide because they are such followers? I did. The reason you think that is actually from a film that was made by Disney in the 1950s called White Wilderness, where there is a scene where lemmings are falling off a cliff. However, what actually was happening, per an investigation into it, was that the crew found that the lemmings weren't actually going to go off the cliff, so they just threw them off the cliff. In essence, they were confronted with empirical evidence that what they assumed would happen was wrong, and instead of just accepting the evidence, they decided, we're just going to stage it anyway. And that is why you have thought that. And it's not just little facts like that. It's also sayings that we share from people in the past. Think about this one. One of the ones I hear a lot. An Oscar Wilde quote. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Sounds positive, doesn't it? And many people use it in this very encouraging and complimentary way. But they're only able to do that by completely ignoring the other half of the quote. And, to be gracious, they may not even know that there's a second half to it, because we don't say it a lot. The full quote is this: imitation is the sincerest form of flattery that mediocrity can pay to greatness. It's an insult. It's always been an insult. Oscar Wilde meant it to knock down people who could only copy the masters. Yet we use it in the complete opposite way by cutting it in half. Now, those aren't earth-shattering examples. They're really not. However, let me talk about two historical events now. One that will leave you feeling disgusted, and one that will probably leave you feeling conflicted. The first one happened in 1932 in Marion County, Alabama. There, the Department of Public Health Services and the Centers for Disease Control rounded up about 600 men, 600 black men. And this was guised or disguised as an offer for free health care, free medical care. Now, out of those 600 men, about 399 were identified as having syphilis. What happened next is that the Department of Health Services and the CDC did not decide to treat these men. Instead, what they did is that they told them that they had, quote, bad blood, a term used for a variety of ailments back then, and offered to continually treat them for it. You see, the government was forming it as they were doing this almost humanitarian effort to help these poor black men. So from 1932 until 1972, these men would go in for checkups. They would go around thinking that, oh, the government's helping us, and they were getting kind of a stipend for it. You know, they really thought that the government had their best interest at heart. Lo and behold, in 1972, a reporter breaks the news of the Tuskegee experiment that for 40 years, these 399 men had been intentionally left untreated for syphilis because the government wanted to know what the disease would do to a human over time. The kicker? The cure for syphilis was discovered 15 years into the study. Yet, somehow, government officials convinced all of the physicians around Marion County, Alabama, to never cure these men, and instead let them be treated by them. Many of them died before they ever found out that, in fact, they had had syphilis this entire time, and it was the government that was leaving them untreated for it. The thing about the Tuskegee experiment is that, so the American government does apologize for it eventually. In 1997, President Bill Clinton officially apologizes on behalf of the U.S. for the experiment. However, in 2010, then President Barack Obama also has to apologize for another experiment that is oddly linked to the Tuskegee experiment. This one, though, happened in Guatemala. I believe from 1946 to 1948, there were 700 men and women who were infected with syphilis, and a lot of them were left untreated. And the whole study was about figuring out whether penicillin could be used as a preventative measure or simply cured syphilis. And I'm going to call them victims of this study, suffered many of the same negative consequences and events as the men in the Tuskegee experiment. I should also mention that this study was a U.S.-led operation that was being conducted in full cooperation with the Guatemalan government. The findings of it have never officially been published, and beyond the details that have been spoken about, there's not much more that has been definitively concluded about it, such as what ultimately it found or why this was needed. In fact, one of the lead researchers of the Guatemalan experiment would actually go on to be one of the lead researchers in the Tuskegee experiment. And the sad thing is, nearly everybody who had done this to those men, including that lead researcher, Dr. John Cutler, would die before the full weight and scope of the atrocities that they did were uncovered. In fact, it wasn't until after Cutler's death in 2003 that the whole Guatemala incident or experiments were uncovered. Now, that's an example of clearly there's a villain. Clearly, the government is the villain in this story, in this historical event. However, let me show you one where the quote-unquote good guys, because I see them as the good guys, and I think everybody should, to be quite honest and frank about it in this scenario, but one where the good guys change something and manipulated the facts of a situation for a greater good, arguably. So if I were to ask you right now, who was the first black woman to refuse to give up her seat on a bus to a white man? You would throw back at me Rosa Parks as if you were a parrot, and you'd be dead wrong. And it's not your fault. Rosa Parks was intentionally the person that you were manipulated into believing was that person. That brave woman. And here's the thing, I'm not knocking Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks, if you look into her life, did way more greater things than sitting on that bus. However, that's not really how things played out on that day. Or at least, not what led up to them. In fact, the first black woman that notably refused to give up her seat to a white man was 15-year-old Claudette Colvin on March 2nd, 1955. Claudette Colvin was a pregnant teen who refused to be so undignified or treated as inferior. And that struck a chord with a lot of the civil rights leaders. They loved the aesthetic of it, the story of it. However, they all decided that a pregnant black teen was not palatable enough for white audiences. At least not the ones they needed to get onto their side to be successful in their movement. So, months later, on December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks, as planned, sits down on that bus. And when the moment comes, she refuses to give up her seat, doing exactly what Claudette Colvin did, so that the movement could still use this very compelling story, but with a palatable face for the masses. So Rosa Parks becomes the person that is celebrated for this defiant, brave act, while Claudette Colvin, the person who really did it first, who was younger, who was about to have a child, whose case actually became central to what led to the end of segregation, is all but forgotten, buried, thrown on the back burner. Unfortunately, Claudette Colvin died earlier this year. But she's the one you should have always been learning about in school. It doesn't matter that maybe her appearance and her life was not as palatable. She deserved the recognition for that bravery. And I'm really sorry that we didn't all learn about her and recognize that while she was alive, or at the time, or even right when it happened. Because the truth is, instead of manipulating things, we should just force people to stomach how things really are. But we don't. Now, why do I tell you all this? Because I want you to start thinking critically if you haven't. I want you to question things. I want you, at worst, to believe everybody's lying to you, and at best, trust but verify. Because, at the end of the day, especially in American society, everything's for sale. Everyone is trying to get something out of you. Everyone's trying to make you something. Make you believe that you should be something. Don't let anybody manipulate you into being someone you really aren't. Don't let anyone manipulate you into supporting something that deep down you don't really support. Don't let anybody manipulate you into doing something morally questionable, simply because it seems to fit a story. Be brave enough to see through all the disguises that manipulation takes. Brush it aside and decide your own way.